You think you know what regret looks like? Wait until you hear what this man did when he walked up to his own front door and a stranger answered. Raymond Harris came back after 25 years. He expected to find his wife and daughter waiting. But the woman who opened the door wasn't his wife. The children playing in the yard weren't his. And the life happening inside those walls was the one he had walked away from, rebuilt by someone who stayed. Welcome everyone to another story. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button. And tell us in the comments, where in the world are you watching from today? Florida, Lagos, maybe Trinidad or the United Kingdom? Let us know. And that is the thing about time. It doesn't wait for you. It doesn't pause while you figure yourself out. It doesn't save your seat at the table. Time just moves. And the people you left behind, if they're strong enough, they move with it. They fill the chair you emptied. They fix the things you broke. They build something new on top of the ruins you made. And then one day you come back, and you stand on the porch, and you knock on the door, and you realize that the life you threw away didn't disappear. It just found someone who deserved it more. This story begins in a town called Meridian, Mississippi. A small town. Quiet. The kind of place where the church bells ring at noon, and the barber knows your grandfather's name, and the grocery store cashier asks about your kids because she watched them grow up. Meridian sits in the eastern part of the state, near the Alabama line, and it has the particular beauty of small southern towns that haven't been polished for tourists. Real beauty, the kind that lives in the cracks of old sidewalks and the rust on wrought iron fences, and the way the light falls through the pine trees at 5 in the afternoon and turns everything gold. On a street called Willowbrook Lane, there was a house. A yellow house with white trim and a front porch with 3 steps and a screen door that creaked when you pushed it open. The house sat on a 1/4 acre of land with a pecan tree in the front yard that was so old and so wide that its branches shaded the entire porch and half the driveway. The house had 3 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen with a linoleum floor and a window over the sink that looked out onto the backyard where a tire swing hung from a magnolia tree. This house had belonged to Raymond Harris. Or rather, it had belonged to Raymond and his wife Charlotte. They bought it together in 1995, the year they married. Charlotte was 22. Raymond was 24. They were young and broke, and so in love that it made their friends roll their eyes. Raymond worked at the lumber mill on Highway 45. Charlotte worked at the school, first as a teacher's aide, then as a 3rd-grade teacher. They combined their savings, $8,000, which was everything they had, and put a down payment on the yellow house on Willowbrook Lane. Charlotte loved that house. She loved the creaky screen door because it announced every visitor before they knocked. She loved the pecan tree because it dropped pecans in October, and she would gather them in a basket and make pies that she brought to the church social. She loved the kitchen window because she could stand at the sink and watch the backyard while she washed dishes and plan what to plant in the garden next spring. She loved the porch because on summer evenings, she and Raymond would sit on the steps and drink sweet tea and watch the fireflies blink on and off across the yard like tiny lanterns lighting a path to somewhere beautiful. They had a daughter, Grace, born in 1997. She was a small baby with brown skin and a full head of dark hair and a cry that was surprisingly loud for someone who weighed 6 pounds 11 ounces. Charlotte said Grace came into the world shouting because she had things to say and didn't want to wait. Raymond said she got that from her mama. For 3 years, the yellow house on Willowbrook Lane was full of noise and light and the smell of Charlotte's cooking. Fried catfish on Fridays, red beans and rice on Mondays, pecan pie whenever the mood struck. Full of Grace's laughter and Grace's crying and Grace's first steps, which happened in the hallway between the kitchen and the living room on a Tuesday afternoon while Charlotte was folding laundry and Raymond was at work, and Charlotte called him so excited that he could barely understand her. And then Raymond left. Now pay attention to what happens next, because this is where the story turns, and it turns in a direction that nobody in that yellow house saw coming. Raymond didn't leave the way most men leave. He didn't pack a bag and announce he was going. He didn't sit Charlotte down and explain. He didn't have a conversation or a fight or a moment of honesty. He left the way a shadow leaves when the sun moves. One day he was there. The next day he wasn't. He went to work at the lumber mill on a Wednesday morning in June of 2000. He clocked in at 7. He clocked out at 3. And then he didn't come home. Not that night. Not the next day. Not the next week. Not ever. Charlotte called the mill. They said he had left at the regular time. She called his friends. Nobody knew anything. She called the police. They said a grown man has the right to leave. They said he wasn't missing. He was just gone. There's a difference, they told her. And the difference is that missing means someone took you, and gone means you took yourself. Charlotte found out what happened 3 weeks later. 3 weeks of checking the hospitals. 3 weeks of calling every person Raymond had ever known. 3 weeks of waiting for headlights in the driveway, and footsteps on the porch, and the creak of the screen door that never came. 3 weeks of lying in bed at night, staring at the ceiling and holding Grace against her chest and whispering, "He's coming back, baby. He's coming back." A woman named Denise Parker called the house on a Tuesday evening. Denise lived in Jackson, Mississippi, about 90 miles west of Meridian. Her voice was casual, breezy, the voice of a woman who had won something and wanted to make sure the loser knew the score. She told Charlotte that Raymond was with her. She told Charlotte they had been seeing each other for 6 months. 6 months, which meant that every time Raymond came home and kissed Charlotte goodnight and sat on those porch steps and drank sweet tea and watched the fireflies, he was already gone. He had left long before he left. He just hadn't told his body yet. Denise told Charlotte that Raymond was starting a new life and wouldn't be coming back. She said it the way you tell someone that a show has been canceled. Just information. Take it or leave it. As if a marriage and a daughter and a yellow house were a television program that had simply run its course. Charlotte hung up the phone. She sat at the kitchen table and stared at the window over the sink, the backyard, the tire swing, the magnolia tree, the garden she had planted that first spring. She stared until the sun went down and the yard went dark and the fireflies came out, those same fireflies that used to make her feel like the yard was full of magic. And now they just blinked in the darkness like unanswered questions. Then Charlotte stood up. She wiped her face with the dish towel. She heated a bottle. She fed her daughter. She changed her diaper. She rocked her to sleep. And then she sat down at the kitchen table again and opened her checkbook and looked at the mortgage payment and the electricity bill and the daycare invoice and the grocery list. And she began the long, quiet, exhausting work of surviving. Now I want you to understand something about Charlotte Harris. This was not a woman who had been given things. This was a woman who had earned every single thing she had. She grew up in Hattiesburg, Mississippi, in a house with her mother Lenora and her grandmother Big Mama, who wasn't big at all. She was 5 feet nothing and weighed about as much as a good-sized sack of flour, but who had a presence that filled a room the way sunlight fills a window. Big Mama worked at a dry cleaner for 40 years. Lenora drove the mail route for the U.S. Postal Service for 32 years. Charlotte was the first woman in her family to graduate college. She went to Mississippi State on a partial scholarship and worked at the campus library to pay the rest. She majored in education because she believed, truly believed in the marrow of her bones, that teaching children was the most important job in the world. When Raymond left, Charlotte had a choice. She could collapse or she could get up. She got up. She got up every morning at 5:30. She made coffee in the kitchen with the yellow walls and the linoleum floor and the window over the sink. She drank it standing up because sitting down felt like giving in. She made Grace's breakfast. She got Grace dressed. She dropped Grace at Aunt Vera's house. Vera was Charlotte's cousin, a heavyset woman who ran an unlicensed daycare out of her living room and charged $20 a week and gave every child a popsicle at 3 o'clock regardless of behavior, because Vera believed that popsicles were a human right. Then Charlotte drove to the elementary school where she worked. She taught third graders about multiplication tables and cloud types and the proper way to write a paragraph with a topic sentence and supporting details and a conclusion. She taught with energy and focus and a smile that was real even when her chest was hollow. She loved those children. She loved watching the moment when a concept clicked, when a child's eyes went wide and their mouth opened and they said, "Oh."
That was the moment. That was the drug. That was the thing that kept Charlotte Harris walking into that building every morning when every other part of her life was broken. After school, she picked up Grace from Vera's. She made dinner. She bathed Grace. She read her a story. She put her to bed. And then, 3 nights a week, she drove to the industrial park on the south side of Meridian, and she cleaned offices until midnight. The office cleaning was the hardest part. Not the work itself. The work was simple. Vacuum, dust, empty trash, wipe surfaces.
The hard part was the silence. The buildings were empty at that hour. No voices, no footsteps, no children asking questions. Just the hum of the vacuum and the fluorescent lights buzzing above, and Charlotte's own thoughts, which at that hour of the night tended to go to dark places. She would find herself standing in a darkened office at 11:30 at night, holding a spray bottle and a rag, staring at a family photo on someone's desk. A man and a woman and 2 kids at the beach, all smiling, all together. And she would feel something twist inside her chest like a wet towel being wrung out. She made $400 a month from the cleaning job. Combined with her teaching salary, it was just enough. Just barely enough. The mortgage was $640 a month. Utilities were about $120. Daycare was $80. Groceries were $200 if she was careful, and Charlotte was careful. She cut coupons. She bought store brands. She made a whole chicken last 3 meals. Roasted on Sunday, chicken salad on Monday, soup from the bones on Tuesday. She didn't buy anything for herself. No clothes, no shoes, no haircuts. She cut her own hair in the bathroom mirror with a pair of kitchen scissors. It wasn't pretty, but it was free. Lenora drove from Hattiesburg every Saturday, an hour and a half each way. She arrived at 8 in the morning in her old Buick LeSabre with the trunk full of supplies. Casseroles she had made the night before, baked chicken, green bean casserole, a pan of cornbread wrapped in foil, cleaning supplies from the dollar store, a bag of clothes for Grace that she had found at the Goodwill in Hattiesburg, and always, a small bag of peppermint candies for Grace, because Lenora believed that grandmothers and peppermints were part of the same covenant. Lenora cleaned the house. She scrubbed the bathroom. She mopped the kitchen floor. She washed the windows. She dusted the shelves. She did the laundry, folding everything in neat stacks on the kitchen table. Grace's little shirts and pants and socks paired together the way only grandmothers pair socks, with precision and love, and a slight irritation at mismatched colors. She fixed things. The dripping faucet in the bathroom that Raymond had promised to fix for a year and never did. Lenora fixed it in 30 minutes with a wrench from the trunk of the Buick and a YouTube video on her phone. The loose doorknob on the bedroom door. Lenora tightened it with a screwdriver. The crack in the kitchen ceiling where the paint was peeling. Lenora spackled it and painted it, and it was done. She did all of this without being asked. She did it without commentary, except for one sentence she said to Charlotte exactly once, on the first Saturday she came to help, standing in the kitchen with a mop in her hand and a look on her face that was steel wrapped in cotton. "Charlotte May Harris, you will not apologize for needing help. You will not feel ashamed. And you will not let that man's absence make you feel like your presence isn't enough. You are more than enough. You are the whole thing. Now hand me that bucket." Charlotte didn't cry. She wanted to. But Lenora's tone didn't leave room for tears. It left room for work. So Charlotte handed her the bucket and they cleaned the house together. And they did it every Saturday for the next 4 years. Grace grew up in that yellow house. She grew up surrounded by women who worked hard and showed up and didn't quit. She grew up without a father and never once heard Charlotte say a bad word about Raymond. Not once. Not a single word. Charlotte could have poisoned that child's mind. She could have told Grace about the phone call from Denise Parker. She could have explained what seeing someone for 6 months meant. She could have said, "Your father chose someone else over us, and he never looked back, and he never sent $1, and he never called on your birthday." But Charlotte didn't say any of those things. Because Charlotte understood something about children that not every parent understands. Children are made of what you pour into them. If you pour in anger, they become angry. If you pour in bitterness, they become bitter. If you pour in love, even when love is the hardest thing to produce, they become loving. And Charlotte wanted Grace to be loving. So when Grace asked about her daddy, Charlotte said, "Your daddy had to go somewhere. I don't know if he's coming back, but I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere, and that's what matters." And that was only the beginning. When Grace was 7, something unexpected happened. A man came to fix the porch steps. The third step had been rotting for 2 years. Raymond had always said he would fix it.
Charlotte had been stepping over it for so long she did it automatically, like breathing. But one afternoon, Grace tripped on the rotten board and scraped her knee, and Charlotte decided that was the end of stepping over broken things. She called a handyman. His name was Earl Whitaker. He was 39 years old. He was a quiet man, not shy, just quiet in the way that men are quiet when they've learned that words should be earned, not spent. He was tall, 6'2", with broad shoulders and hands that were calloused and sure. He wore work boots and jeans and a plain white t-shirt, and he showed up exactly when he said he would, which in Charlotte's recent experience was extraordinary. Earl fixed the step in 2 hours. He replaced the rotten board with new wood that he cut and sanded right there on the porch. When he was done, he tested it by standing on it with his full weight and bouncing 3 times. He looked at Charlotte and said, "That'll hold." Charlotte looked at the step.
She looked at Earl. She said, "What do I owe you?" Earl said, $40. "But if you've got any of that pecan pie I smell, I'll take 30 and a slice." Charlotte laughed. It was the first real laugh she had produced in 4 years. It came out of her like a surprise, like opening a drawer you thought was empty and finding something inside. She gave him the pie, the whole pie. He said he couldn't take the whole pie. She said, "Yes, you can. I'll make another one." He took the pie. He ate a slice on the porch steps, the new steps, the ones he had just fixed, and he told Charlotte that the magnolia tree in the backyard needed trimming because a branch was growing toward the roof. Charlotte said she knew. He said he could do it Saturday if she wanted. Charlotte said she'd think about it. She thought about it for approximately 2 hours. Then she called him and said Saturday was fine. Now, I'm not going to tell you that Earl Whitaker was a perfect man. Nobody is. But I will tell you this. Earl showed up. That Saturday. And the Saturday after. And the one after that. He trimmed the magnolia. He fixed the gutter. He repainted the trim that had been peeling. He built Grace a new tire swing because the old rope was fraying. He did these things without being asked twice. He did them because they needed doing, and because he was there, and because that's what Earl Whitaker did. He fixed things. Not because fixing things made him important, because broken things bothered him. Earl and Charlotte started dating a year after the porch step. Slowly. Carefully. The way you walk across a floor that has broken underneath you before. You test every board. You listen for the creak. You keep your weight balanced so that if something gives way, you can catch yourself. Charlotte didn't trust easily anymore. Raymond had cured her of that. She had trusted Raymond the way you trust a bridge, completely, without thinking, until the day it collapses and you realize you never checked the supports. She wasn't going to make that mistake again. So she watched Earl. She watched him the way a scientist watches an experiment. She watched how he talked to Grace, always at eye level, always with patience, always with the kind of attention that said, "You matter to me." She watched how he handled frustration, calmly, with a deep breath, never with his voice raised, never with his fists. She watched how he treated the waitress at the diner where they had their first dinner. He said please and thank you, and left a tip that was more than the bill. She watched, and she waited. And Earl, who understood what she was doing because Earl understood most things without being told, let her watch. He didn't rush. He didn't push. He didn't say, "I'm not like him," because saying you're not like somebody is the thing that people who are like somebody always say. Instead, he just showed up. Saturday after Saturday, week after week. He brought his tools. He brought his quiet. He brought a patience that felt like it went all the way down to the bedrock. Their first date was at the Meridian Diner on 22nd Avenue. Charlotte wore a dress she hadn't worn in 4 years. Earl wore a clean shirt and boots he had polished. They ordered catfish and hush puppies and sweet tea, and they talked for 3 hours about everything and nothing. The weather, the school, the pine trees, Grace's first loose tooth, the best way to smoke ribs, whether okra was good or evil. Charlotte said good. Earl said the jury was still out. They didn't talk about Raymond. They didn't talk about the past. They talked about the weather and the food and the future, which is what people talk about when they're building something instead of mourning something.
Earl came to the house for dinner twice a week. He sat at the kitchen table with Charlotte and Grace, and he ate whatever Charlotte made, and he always said it was good. Even the time she burned the rice so bad it stuck to the pot like cement, and she almost cried from frustration and exhaustion. Earl looked at the rice. He looked at Charlotte. He scooped a spoonful onto his plate and ate it and said, "Got some crunch to it. I like crunch." Grace laughed so hard she spit out her juice. Charlotte looked at this man eating burned rice without complaint, and something inside her that had been locked for years clicked open like a door. They married in 2009. A small ceremony in the backyard of the yellow house under the magnolia tree that Earl had trimmed, next to the tire swing he had built. The preacher was Reverend Clyde from First Baptist. The music was Charlotte's cousin playing guitar badly, but with heart. Grace was 12 years old.
She stood between them during the vows and held both their hands. She wore a white dress that Lenora had found at a consignment shop in Hattiesburg and altered herself on a sewing machine that was older than Charlotte. Grace held Charlotte's left hand and Earl's right hand, and she looked up at both of them, and when Reverend Clyde said, "Do you take this woman?" Grace whispered, "Say yes." And Earl looked down at her and said, "Yes, ma'am, I do." Lenora sat in the front row in a folding chair on the grass and cried the way grandmothers cry at weddings, not because they're sad, but because they've watched their daughter struggle for so long that when something good finally arrives, the relief comes out as water. She cried, and she clapped, and she ate 3 slices of pecan pie, and she told Earl, "You break her heart, and I will drive from Hattiesburg with a wrench in my hand." Earl said, "Yes, ma'am." He never doubted she meant it. Earl moved into the yellow house. He brought his toolbox and his work boots and a recliner that Charlotte said was the ugliest piece of furniture she had ever seen, and that Earl said was the most comfortable chair ever manufactured. And that became the subject of a running argument that lasted 16 years and counting, and was never resolved, and never would be resolved, and both of them knew it, and neither of them cared, because the argument about the recliner was not really about the recliner. It was about the luxury of having something so small and so unimportant to disagree about. It was about the privilege of a marriage where the biggest fight was about furniture. After what Charlotte had been through, an ugly recliner was a blessing. Earl and Charlotte had 2 children together, a boy named Marcus, born in 2010, a girl named Pearl, born in 2012. Marcus was a serious boy, studious. He liked math and football and building model cars at the kitchen table on Sunday afternoons, while Earl sat across from him and helped with the small parts, the 2 of them working in silence the way men work together when the work itself is the conversation. Pearl was the opposite. She was loud, she was funny. She had Charlotte's laugh and Earl's stubbornness, and she talked from the moment she woke up until the moment she fell asleep, often mid-sentence. The yellow house that had been quiet for 4 years after Raymond left was now loud again. Gloriously loud. The noise of 3 children fighting over the bathroom, the noise of Earl's boots on the porch steps in the evening, the noise of Charlotte laughing at something Pearl said, the noise of Marcus's football bouncing off the side of the house, which drove Charlotte crazy, but which she never actually told him to stop because the sound meant he was home, and home meant safe, and safe was the thing Charlotte had been building for 15 years. Earl never tried to replace Raymond. He never told Grace to call him Dad. He never pretended that the history didn't exist. He was honest with Grace from the beginning. He told her, when she was old enough to understand, "I'm not your daddy. but I'm here. And I'm going to take care of you and your mama in this house. And you can call me whatever you want." Grace thought about it for a week. Then she said, "I'm going to call you Earl." Earl said, "That works." 3 years later, when she was 15, she started calling him Dad. Not because he asked, because she decided. And that is the thing about earned things. They mean more than given things, because someone chose them. But the truth was far worse than anyone imagined.
Because 25 years after he disappeared, Raymond Harris came back. He came back on a Sunday afternoon in October of 2025. The pecan tree was dropping pecans. They fell on the porch roof and rolled down and landed in the grass with soft thuds, like a clock marking time in its own language. Charlotte was in the kitchen making pie. The smell of cinnamon and toasted pecans filled the house the way it did every October. Earl was in the backyard pushing Pearl on the tire swing. Pearl was 13, but she still loved that swing. Marcus was sitting on the porch doing geometry homework, his pencil tapping against the railing the way 15-year-old boys tap things when they're stuck on a problem. Grace was inside, visiting for the weekend from Jackson, where she was now 28 years old and working as a nurse practitioner at a community health clinic. A car pulled up to the curb. A rental car. White. Clean. The kind of car nobody on Willowbrook Lane drove. A man got out. He was 49 years old, but he looked older. His face had the particular weariness of a man who had spent 25 years living with a decision he couldn't undo. Thinner than he used to be, gray in his hair, lines around his eyes that looked like they had been drawn by disappointment rather than laughter. He wore a button-down shirt and clean pants, the clothes of a man who had thought carefully about what to wear for this moment. Raymond Harris stood on the sidewalk outside the house he had walked away from 25 years ago. He looked at the yellow house. Still yellow, but different. The paint was fresh. The shutters were repaired. The porch railing was new. The steps he remembered having a rotten board that he kept promising to fix, were rebuilt entirely. New wood, sanded smooth, painted, solid. Someone had fixed everything he had left broken. The pecan tree was bigger now, its branches wider, reaching further across the yard like arms opening. The tire swing in the back was new. He could hear a child laughing as someone pushed her, and a man's low voice saying, "Hold on tight, Pearl." Pearl. He didn't know that name. That wasn't his child. That wasn't his voice. That wasn't his life. Not anymore. He walked up the porch steps. His shoes touched the wood that Earl Whitaker had cut and sanded and installed 20 years ago for $40 and a pecan pie. He knocked on the screen door. The screen door creaked. Same creak. Same door. Some things don't change. Marcus looked up from his homework. He looked at Raymond through the screen the way you look at a stranger, without recognition, without context. "Can I help you?" Marcus said. Polite. Neutral. The voice of a boy raised by a mother who taught manners and a father who modeled them. "I'm looking for Charlotte," Raymond said. His voice was rough, rusty, like an engine that hasn't turned over in years. Marcus turned his head toward the kitchen. "Mama, somebody's here for you." Charlotte came out of the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel. She pushed open the screen door. She looked at Raymond. And for a moment, just a moment, time did that thing it does when the past and the present crash into each other. It stopped. Everything stopped. The pecans stopped falling. The swing stopped creaking. The pie stopped smelling. Everything held its breath. Then Charlotte's face changed. Not with anger, not with tears, with something harder to name. Recognition. The recognition of a woman looking at a man she used to love the way you look at a photo of a house you used to live in that someone else lives in now. "Raymond," she said. "Charlotte, I came back. I know I've been gone." 25 years, Charlotte said. She said it simply, without heat. Just a fact, the way you say the weather. "I made a mistake," Raymond said. "The biggest mistake of my life. Denise, it didn't work out. Nothing worked out. I've been moving around. Memphis, Mobile, Biloxi.
I couldn't stay anywhere because everywhere I went, I kept thinking about this house, this porch. You. Charlotte looked at him. She looked at this man who had clocked out of the lumber mill and clocked out of his marriage and clocked out of his daughter's life on the same Wednesday afternoon 25 years ago. She looked at the gray in his hair and the lines in his face and the particular hollow expression of a man who had spent 25 years running from something and had finally run out of road. And that is the thing about running. Eventually, you stop. Not because you've arrived somewhere, because your legs give out. Raymond, Charlotte said, I need you to listen to me, and I need you to hear what I'm saying. Raymond nodded. Earl came around the side of the house. He had Pearl on his shoulders. Pearl was 13, giggling, her braids swinging. Earl set her down when he saw the stranger on the porch. He looked at Charlotte. Charlotte looked at him. Something passed between them that didn't need words. 20 years of marriage had built a language between them that was faster than speech. Earl, Charlotte said, this is Raymond, Grace's father. Earl looked at Raymond. He didn't extend his hand. He didn't step forward. He didn't puff up or square his shoulders or do any of the things that insecure men do when the past shows up on their porch. He just stood there, solid, present, the way a foundation is present. You don't notice it until you need it. I know who you are, Earl said. His voice was calm. Raymond looked at Earl. He looked at Pearl. He looked at Marcus on the porch. He looked at the tire swing, the painted trim, the fixed steps, the clean gutters, the life that was happening in the house he had abandoned. And something in his face collapsed. Not with anger, with understanding. The worst kind of understanding. The kind that arrives 25 years too late. Grace appeared in the doorway. She had heard the voices. She looked at Raymond. She didn't recognize him at first. She had been 3 when he left. She had no memories of him, only the absence of him. The shape of a missing person in every family photo, every school play audience, every father-daughter dance she didn't attend, every birthday cake she blew out with one wish she never told anyone, that he would come back. Grace, Charlotte said gently, this is your father. Grace looked at Raymond. Raymond looked at Grace. He saw Charlotte in her face. He saw himself in her jaw. He saw 25 years of moments he would never get back. First steps he didn't see. First words he didn't hear. First days of school he didn't drive her to. Graduations he didn't clap at. Heartbreaks he didn't comfort. Victories he didn't celebrate. I know you don't know me, Raymond said. His voice cracked. I know I don't have any right to be here. I don't have any right to anything. I needed to see you. I needed you to know that leaving wasn't about you. It was never about you. Grace was quiet for a long time. The screen door creaked in the breeze. The pecans tapped against the porch railing as they fell. Then she spoke, and what she said was the most devastating thing Raymond had ever heard, because it was kind. I used to dream about this, Grace said. When I was little, I used to dream about you coming up those steps and knocking on that door. I used to practice what I would say. I had a whole speech. I was going to tell you how angry I was, how much you hurt us, how Mama worked 2 jobs and cleaned offices at midnight, how Grandma Lenora drove from Hattiesburg every Saturday, how Mama stepped over the broken porch step for 4 years because you said you would fix it and you never did. She paused. She looked at Earl. Earl was standing with his hands in his pockets, looking at the magnolia tree, giving Grace the space to say what she needed to say without anyone's eyes on her except the person who needed to hear it. But then Earl came, Grace said. He came to fix a porch step. One porch step. The one you said you would fix for 4 years. He fixed it in 2 hours. And then he asked Mama if he could trim the magnolia tree. And she said she'd think about it. And 2 hours later she called him and said Saturday was fine. And he came that Saturday. And the next Saturday. And the one after that. He fixed the gutter. He fixed the trim. He built me a new tire swing because the old one was fraying and he said it wasn't safe. He painted the fence. He replaced the screen on the back door. He did every single thing you said you were going to do and never did. One thing at a time. Every Saturday. Without being asked twice. Without complaining. Without expecting anything except maybe a slice of Mama's pecan pie. Grace paused. She looked at the porch steps, Earl's steps, the steps that started everything. She could feel the wood under her feet, solid and sure, holding her weight the way it had held the weight of this family for 20 years. "And then he fixed something you couldn't see," Grace said. "He fixed my mama's heart. Not with grand gestures, not with big promises. He fixed it the way he fixed the porch step, by showing up, by doing the work, by being there when nobody else was. One day at a time, one Saturday at a time, until one day I looked around and realized the house wasn't broken anymore. And I stopped practicing my speech, the speech I was going to say to you, because I didn't need it anymore, because the broken things got fixed, not by you, by a man who showed up." She looked at Earl. Earl was standing with his hands in his pockets, looking at the magnolia tree, giving Grace the space to say what she needed to say. He didn't insert himself. He didn't puff up. He just stood there, quiet, present, the way a good man stands when a woman he loves is finding her voice. "I used to be angry at you," Grace said, turning back to Raymond. "When I was little, I was angry. When I was 12, I was angry. When I was 18 and I graduated high school and you weren't in the audience, I was furious. But somewhere along the way, the anger turned into something else. Not forgiveness exactly. Understanding. I understood that you were a man who wasn't ready. You weren't ready for Mama. You weren't ready for me. You weren't ready for this house and this porch and this life. And rather than learn how to be ready, you left." And the sad thing is, Raymond, I can't even call you Dad because that word belongs to someone else now. The sad thing is that everything you ran away from is still here. It's all still here. It just belongs to someone who earned it. Raymond's eyes were wet. His chin was shaking. He looked at the porch steps, the steps Earl had built, the steps that started everything. He looked at the pecan tree, the tire swing, the garden, the house full of people and noise and the smell of cinnamon pie. Everything he had thrown away, rebuilt by hands that weren't his, hands that showed up, hands that stayed. "I'm sorry," Raymond said. "I know that's not enough. I know 25 years of sorry doesn't fill a thimble, but I'm sorry. For everything." Charlotte stepped forward. She stood on the porch in front of the man she had married at 22, and the life she had rebuilt at 25, and the family she had grown in the soil of his absence, watered with her own sweat, and Lenora's casseroles, and Vera's popsicles, and Earl's steady hands. She looked at Raymond without anger, without bitterness, without the need for revenge or punishment or the satisfaction of seeing him suffer. She had moved past all of that years ago. What she felt now was something quieter, something closer to compassion. The compassion of a woman who understood that the person Raymond had hurt the most was not her or Grace. It was himself. Because Charlotte had rebuilt. Charlotte had a husband who ate burned rice without complaint, and 3 children who fought over the bathroom, and a pecan tree that dropped gold every October. Raymond had a rental car and a clean shirt, and 25 years of silence where a life used to be. "Raymond," Charlotte said, "I forgave you a long time ago, not for your sake, for mine, and for Grace's. I couldn't raise her with a stone on my chest, so I set it down. But forgiveness doesn't mean a seat at the table. You don't get to come back and fit into a life that other people built while you were gone. Earl built this porch. Earl raised these children. Earl held me when I cried and made me laugh when I forgot how. That man right there is the father of this house. Not because of blood, because of presence." She paused. She looked at Raymond with steady eyes. "You didn't lose us, Raymond. You left us. There's a difference. Missing means someone took you. Leaving means you took yourself. And the life you threw away didn't disappear. It just found someone who stayed." Raymond stood on those porch steps for a long time. He didn't argue. He didn't beg. He didn't make excuses. He just stood there, a 49-year-old man standing on wood that another man had cut and sanded, looking at a family that another man had built, understanding at last what his own absence weighed. Then he nodded. He turned. He walked down the steps. He walked down the sidewalk. He got in the rental car. He sat there for 5 minutes with his hands on the wheel. And then he drove away. Grace watched him go from the porch. Marcus looked up from his homework and then back down. Pearl ran to the backyard for the swing. Earl stood behind Charlotte and put his hand on her shoulder. Charlotte reached up and covered his hand with hers. That evening, Charlotte made pecan pie. She stood at the kitchen window and looked at the backyard. The magnolia tree Earl had trimmed. The tire swing Earl had built. The garden she had planted 25 years ago that was still growing. She hummed while she worked. A hymn she'd known since she was a girl. Something about standing on solid ground. Grace came into the kitchen. She leaned against the counter and crossed her arms. "You okay, Mama?" Charlotte slid the pie into the oven and closed the door. She straightened up and looked at her daughter. This woman who had grown up in this house without a father and become someone remarkable. A nurse, a healer, a woman who chose to fix things instead of break them. "I'm okay, baby. I've been okay for a long time." Grace was quiet. Then she said, "Earl's a good man. The best I know. He never tried to be my father. He just was." Charlotte smiled. "That's how it works, Grace. The real ones don't try. They just show up. Day after day, step after step, until one day you look around and realize the house isn't broken anymore." That night, after the pie was eaten and the dishes were washed, and Marcus and Pearl were in bed, and Grace was asleep in her old room, the room she had grown up in, the room where Earl had once installed a ceiling fan because Grace said her room was too hot in summer, and Earl said that was unacceptable, Charlotte and Earl sat on the porch steps. The same steps. Earl's steps. The October air was cool. It smelled like pecans and wood smoke from somebody's chimney down the street, and the particular sweetness of Mississippi nights when the summer heat finally releases its grip and the cool moves in gently, like a hand on your forehead when you're sick. Earl was quiet. He was always quiet in the evenings. That was one of the things Charlotte loved about him. He didn't fill silence with noise. He let silence be silence. He sat with his elbows on his knees and his calloused hands clasped together, and he looked at the yard and the pecan tree and the street beyond. The street light on the corner cast a pool of yellow light on the sidewalk. A dog barked 2 houses down. A car passed. Normal sounds. The sounds of a life that was still going. "You all right?" Charlotte asked. "I'm all right," Earl said. "That was a lot today, him showing up like that." "It was. You didn't say much." "Didn't need to. Grace said everything that needed saying." Charlotte smiled. She leaned her head against his shoulder. His shirt smelled like sawdust and detergent, and the faint cologne she had given him for Christmas 3 years ago that he used so sparingly she was pretty sure the bottle would outlive them both. "Earl? Do you ever wonder what would have happened if he hadn't left?" Earl was quiet for a moment. He looked at the porch steps, the wood he had cut, the joints he had fitted, the paint he had brushed on a Saturday afternoon 20 years ago while a 3-year-old girl sat on the grass and watched him and asked him 100 questions about why wood had lines in it. "No," Earl said, "I don't wonder about that. Because if he hadn't left, you wouldn't have needed a porch step fixed. And if you hadn't needed a porch step fixed, I wouldn't have knocked on your door. And if I hadn't knocked on your door, you wouldn't have given me that whole pecan pie. And if you hadn't given me that pie, Charlotte, I wouldn't be sitting on these steps right now with the best woman I've ever known, in the best house I've ever lived in, listening to my daughter snore through the window, and my son's alarm clock ticking upstairs, and my other daughter's tire swing creaking in the wind." He turned and looked at Charlotte. Those steady eyes, that calm face, the face of a man who had walked into a broken house 20 years ago and fixed one thing at a time, week by week, Saturday by Saturday, until everything held. "Charlotte, I've been all right since the day you gave me that whole pecan pie. I knew right then. Sitting on these steps, well, on the old steps, the ones before I fixed them, eating that pie with my boots still on and sawdust in my hair, I knew. A woman who gives you the whole pie isn't someone you walk away from. She's someone you stay for. She's someone you build for. She's someone you wake up at 5:30 for and drive to the hardware store for and eat burned rice for and argue about an ugly recliner with for the next 16 years of your life. Charlotte laughed. That laugh. The real one. The one that had come back into the world because a quiet man fixed a porch step and ate a piece of pie and asked if he could come back on Saturday. She leaned against his shoulder. He put his arm around her. The screen door creaked behind them in the breeze. The fireflies came out. They blinked on and off across the yard, one by one, like tiny lanterns lighting a path to somewhere that wasn't far away at all. It was right here, on this porch, on these steps, in this house. It had always been right here. And the yellow house stood solid on Willowbrook Lane. The porch that Earl built, the garden Charlotte planted, the swing where Pearl laughed, the table where Marcus did his homework, the room where Grace slept when she came home. A house full of people who showed up, day after day, step after step, until the broken things got fixed, and the empty chairs got filled, and the life that one man threw away became the life that another man held with both hands and never let go. And so the story ends. But before you go, like, subscribe, and leave us a comment. Tell us where you're watching from and what this story taught you. We read every single comment. See you in the next story.